The calendar has flipped to March, the most marvelous month of the year. It means the postseason has arrived in college basketball. We've got a bracket set for the Big East Women's Basketball Championship presented by Jeep. It gets underway this weekend. What does UConn want to accomplish in terms of building momentum towards their title defense in March Madness? Speaking of March Madness, it seems like Villanova has punched their ticket, but can the Wildcats give UConn another run for their money this weekend? Seton Hall's injuries have derailed their season, but you never know come March. Same can be said for Creighton and even Marquette, maybe St. John's. A lot of contenders this week. We are joined by former Seton Hall guard and women's basketball analyst Christine Koren-Motta as we will preview the week ahead. All coming up next on Big East Beat. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Big East Beat. We're brought to you by our friends at Home Field Apparel. No David White or Brian Webster on your screen, but I think you'll understand why. Christine Koren-Motta played point guard at Seton Hall. She also was an assistant coach at the University of Delaware. She's a basketball analyst, works for the CAA, the University of Delaware, ESPN Plus, the Big Five, Villanova, you name it. They pay you, you show up, right, Christine?
Absolutely. Give me this tri-state area up in here and anything basketball, I'm ready to go.
You are certainly an expert and somebody that follows this game oh so closely, so passionate about it. And this is the best time of year. I mean, you wait all regular season. You're a little sad because it means it's almost over. But March is what it's all about. A Big East championship presented by Jeep coming up this weekend. Obviously, UConn comes in the proverbial favorite. Everybody expecting the Huskies to win because they've beaten everybody they've played all year long. But it's still a championship setting, and it's still a special juice. You've lived that before. You played in a couple of these. What is it like for the players preparing to take this stage?
Well, first of all, it is the best time of the year. I know a lot of people think December time is the most wonderful time of the year, but it is absolutely March. Absolutely love it. Especially I think about the Big East tournament, it has a different kind of intensity. It's compact, it's urgent, it's emotional. You think every possession matters more because it's win or go home. You think about the seniors potentially playing their last game every single game because you don't know if you're going to make the postseason. The physicality ramps up, the whistles sometimes get swallowed officially or unofficially. And then you see, coaching adjustments game to game in real time, I think. But I think as a player, that urgency, that sense of urgency, that realization, especially for seniors, that things are starting to come to an end. You just want to play one more game. You want to be in that locker room one more time with your teammates. You think of the host hotels, you go down to breakfast every day. There's less teams and you kind of stare at each other like, okay, we're still here. We're still in our gear. Our fans are still in the hotel. It's just a great environment. Anytime you're talking about, the conference tournament, especially the Big East tournament, because I think the Big East tournament in particular is about composure. The margins shrink. A team that might win by 18 in January might have to grind out a 6 or 7 point game because the opponents, they're seeing them for maybe the second or third time. Sometimes it becomes less about talent, more about execution and maturity. Sometimes it becomes about teams that have been there before, and then you start to see and learn really quickly who can handle pressure. Who can hit their free throws, who can compete when the shot clock's running down or there's those short turnarounds. And then I love the coaching perspective. A lot of times it's a chess match. There's quick scouting. Even though you've seen teams, you've been watching them all year, you still have to then have that quick scout, the quick adjustment. You got to manage fatigue. And I think a lot of times that's why the experienced teams, the deep teams, the mature teams, they often separate themselves.
Yeah, you've been there before. Walk people who haven't behind the scenes of preparation and how different it is when you're getting ready for this type of event. Because normally, you get 2 games a week. You kind of get a little advanced scout. You're getting prepared for your first opponent. Then you have a couple days to regroup for your next. This all of a sudden comes rapid fire. What's the differences and kind of what goes on behind the scenes as you get ready?
Well, it's kind of turning back time. It's back to those AAU tournament days where you had to play multiple games in a day, or multiple games over a 3-day weekend. It's back to that style. It's a lot of times it's the team who is the hottest, not always the best team, but the team who makes a good run. And I really think that when teams are used to playing maybe 2 games in a week, and you have to have that quick turnaround, it's the teams that are the most healthy. It's the teams that have a deep bench. And it's just that feel of wanting to be there one more day. But there's an excitement about it as well. So there's nothing like the conference tournament, everything about it. The host hotel, walking around in your gear, even that alone is just a little bit of bragging rights. But I think it does take a lot of these players back to their high school days where they had to play multiple games in a day, multiple games in a weekend, and you have to be able to withstand it.
And then for the assistant coaches and really coaching staff as a whole, it's kind of that catch-22 because you've seen all these teams. Big East is a true round robin. You've seen them twice already. The players are familiar with this scouting report, but you got to kind of simplify it a little bit too, right? Because it's a quick turnaround, especially after that first game. You've got less than 24 hours to prepare and understand everything you need your players to be able to comprehend.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for the coaching staffs leading up to the tournament and during the tournament. You win your game, and then you see all of the assistant coaches sitting at the table watching the next game of who you might play. But each different coach is focusing on either of the teams. So you kind of hope your team wins because that's your scout, and then you get to break it down. But it is just a different feel. I think it's taking kind of that high level view overall, but then seeing the things not only within the tournament that those teams are doing that you have to focus in on, but also the few games leading up to the tournament. It's not so much about how you played them the last time. It's about how they're playing right now and what you're doing well, who's healthy, different matchups. So there's a lot going through these coaching staff minds of, these teams are not the same teams they were in December or even January. It's kind of figuring out who is this team now in March, right now at the Big East tournament.
Yeah, well, one team that we know who they are, the UConn Huskies, they've won 47 consecutive games. Now, Christine, it is a remarkable feat. Their Gino Auriemma just keeps cranking out these undefeated regular seasons. He was quick to point out this week, look, it wasn't as easy as necessarily we made it look. But in the era where it feels like women's college basketball is as deep as it's ever been, how has UConn been able to assert some separation again the way they have? Their average margin of victory is 37.5 points this year.
It has been very impressive. I don't think anyone thought, losing a Paige Beckers level player, one of the all-time greats at UConn, that this team was going to run the table like they did in the regular season. Now, granted, I'm not sure if their strength of schedule was as tough as it has been in previous years, but they have played really good teams, and they've come out on top during those games. So I think this is an elite team, but my concern for UConn, not so much in the Big East tournament, but for the NCAA tournament, is they haven't played those elite teams, as many of them, in a bit. So when you're running the table through the Big East, you're winning by that much. What is it going to be like when you have that close game, when you're trying to get to the Elite Eight from the Sweet 16, and now you have a close game, but you haven't had one, maybe in 2 months. I mean, obviously Villanova was winning, at halftime not that long ago, but you really haven't had a competitive game in a long time. But I think, Gino Auriemma talks a lot about obviously Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd, but they're more than those two players. He says we're those two players, and then we have some support, but they really are a great team all around. They have more depth, I think, than people realize. They're elite defensively. They do control the tempo, and not necessarily by playing slow. Their depth is back. Their separation isn't really just talent. It's execution. I think that's the biggest thing for UConn. They execute. They are able to win with versatility. They've seen different players step up. Yes, AZ Fudd. Yes, Sarah Strong. I mean, elite players that will continue playing for many, many years. But their supporting cast isn't just the supporting cast, and it's not just the star power. So, it's not that they just have 5 more stars than everybody else. I really think that this version of UConn, they defend at a championship level. I think when I watch film on them or watch their games, they switch very cleanly. They protect the rim. They close out possessions with rebounding. They do a very good job of limiting those offensive possessions against their opponents. So I don't think it's the era of when UConn was being labeled too good for college basketball. I don't think that's the year we're dealing with, but I do think they've been dominant in the regular season. So, within this league, within the Big East, yes, I think there is a big gap. I think it's significant because of, who they're putting out on the floor. But I don't think they always overwhelm a team early. We've seen with Gino, he's not been pleased in the first quarter or the second quarter of some of these games, but they do suffocate you over 40 minutes. So I do think they're an elite team. Not sure how much they've been tested in the last 2 months, but they're going to have to stay on their toes. And anytime you win a championship, if they're able to kind of run the table and continue that through the Big East, you know that Gino Auriemma will get this team ready.
It's kind of funny. They did go out of conference twice, and they absolutely destroyed Tennessee and Notre Dame in succession. Obviously, Notre Dame and Tennessee, Hannah Hidalgo is still one of the best players in the country, but they aren't top 10 teams. They're still really good programs, and the way they beat them certainly was impressive. But Gino Auriemma is kind of echoing all of the sentiments that you just laid bare there. It's going to be harder in March, and that is why, despite that supporting cast that you talked about that is very capable, he has relied more on Fudd and Strong here down the stretch. Their usage rates are both up. Fudd is up near 30% now, and Strong is in that 27, 28%. So clearly he's got to lean on his top two players, and his argument is if we lean more on the top two, it opens things up for everybody else. As a coach, you understand there's a lot of truth to that.
Absolutely. And I think too, just getting back to that Tennessee game you were talking about, Tennessee looks a lot different right now than they did. They've lost about 6 in a row. They're kind of imploding a little bit. So that win doesn't look as good now as it did then. At that time, Tennessee was rolling a little bit. So I think that was a good win at the time, but not so much anymore. But, talking about those other players, they do provide UConn with more balance than maybe even Gino gives them credit for. I think if you take that regular season finale against St. John's at Madison Square Garden, they started the game on a 13-2 run, and all 5 starters accounted for the first 6 baskets. So they have had balance. They've shown the ability to have some of that balance. Although Gino says he doesn't think this team is as good as last year's team, again, because they don't have Paige, and that team even struggled at times when you think about it, when they were entering the team as a 2 seed. So I think, this team, this season, they've looked a little bit flawless. They're undefeated. But, when they don't have Paige, now they have Sarah Strong, who now has another year under her belt. AZ Fudd obviously wants to win another championship. She's trying to go out as one of the greats, obviously injury plagued throughout her career. But this has been the first season where she's really, truly been healthy.
It's kind of funny with this UConn team because certainly, Paige Beckers was one of the best players, not just in college basketball. She goes to the WNBA and immediately hits that stage and asserts herself as one of the best in the sport. So you think, how could they possibly be better? But then you also look at Fudd and Strong, and, Strong's so much better this second year. She's talked about that down the stretch of how much more understanding she has of the system and how many different ways now that she can be used that she couldn't a season ago because she just didn't understand what the coaching staff was kind of talking about as they were trying to get her in position, and it's made her a better all-around player. And you can make a very compelling argument that they're not just 2 All-Americans, they're the 2 best players in the country. And that's why this team, better than last year's team, which, by the way, if you remember, was a 2 seed. They were struggling at times coming into that tournament. They didn't look the same when they played their non-conference games in February. They stubbed their toe a couple different occasions, and then they just came together and blew everybody out in March. This team, they're hoping it's not the inverse because they're blowing everybody out in the regular season. How do they gel for the postseason, and what can the Big East tournament do to prepare them for March Madness?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think if anybody would have said this team numbers-wise is better than last year's team before the season started, I don't think anybody would have believed that with losing an all-time great like Paige Beckers. But technically number wise, they are better. And when you talk about what can teams do, teams can try to slow them down a little bit. Get to the free throw line by getting a couple of those players into foul trouble, even though they just reload and put some more players in. It's a different mindset when AZ Fudd is off the floor. It's a different mindset for that team when Sarah Strong is off the floor, because when you have two players that are as experienced now, and Sarah Strong, yes, she has a little bit more experience, but in the women's basketball, she has a lot of experience because she's elite. But when you take Strong or Fudd off the floor, there is a little bit of an unsettledness for the team. When the ball's in AZ Fudd's hands, the team feels confident. When she's on the floor hitting threes, the team is confident. You take her out or she's in foul trouble, things get tight, then anybody is vulnerable. When you talk about, the best teams don't always win because 99 out of 100 times they might win, but there's always that one time. And it seems cliche, but we've seen it in the past, even talking about Villanova, you talk about the 2003 team with Trish Julien, where they were able to slow that game down and beat UConn, held UConn to only 48 points and then went on to the Elite Eight. I mean, nobody thought that was possible. I remember watching that game, just being amazed with how tight, the team who was supposed to win won. And then you even think back to, Denise Dillon, young in her head coaching career at Villanova. I mean, she had all those years at Drexel, but Villanova, she comes over to Villanova 2022, and she's the one who snaps UConn's 169 game regular season, conference season win streak. So Denise has had experience in stopping them. Villanova in general has that history of being able to do the unthinkable against UConn. So when you think of those types of things, and I'm wearing my Hickory sweatshirt, my Jimmy Chitwood, who thought that the Hoosiers, would have gone on and been able to beat the big school. But this is the time of the year. It's the time of the underdogs. It's the time of the Cinderellas. So that's how you have to go in thinking when you play UConn, no matter how improbable it feels. If you're any of the other teams in the Big East, you have to look to those times and say, you know what? No one thinks it can happen, but we can believe it's going to happen.
Yeah, you can just picture a Jasmine Bosco or a Skylar Forbes stand in the huddle. What did Jimmy Chitwood say? I'll make it, coach. Maybe just saying that type of thing. That's the type of year it is this time of year.
I don't know if they'll be running the picket fence on him, but I think the I'll make it mindset is definitely worthy.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here from our sponsor. When we return, we'll talk about the rest of the field. The Big East Energy Network is proud to partner with Home Field Apparel, a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. They've got over 150 different colleges to choose from in their arsenal, including all of the Big East programs that you know and love. If you're a Big East fan, chances are you kind of have an old school soul. Well, you want that old school look while you're showing off your fandom. The logos, the history, it's such a part of the Big East. And Home Field Apparel, that's their specialty. They go through all the archives and history of each school, try to delve into what makes it special before they put out any type of new apparel. And they just dropped a whole bunch of new product when it comes to the Big East. I have spent literally hours just going through all the different options that they have. It is a real fun trip down memory lane, and it also can add to your wardrobe. Visit homefieldapparel.com for more information or check out the link in the description below. Home Field Apparel, a proud supporter of the Big East Energy Network. Our thanks to Home Field Apparel for their support. Our guest is Christine Koren-Motta, former guard for the Seton Hall Pirates. Also went to an NCAA tournament with the University of Delaware. Spent some time as an assistant coach with the Blue Hens. Now she is a broadcaster. She works for a ton of different entities, including Villanova, the Big Five, Big East, CAA, University of Delaware, ESPN+. Boy, your taxes must be tough to do, Christine.
Hey, you got to hustle. Sometimes you got to hustle. I got two boys in high school about to go to college. You got to make it everywhere you can.
Yeah, they are good lacrosse players, too. So she's a lacrosse expert as well. She could do a little bit of everything. Let's talk about Villanova, team right up the road from you. You mentioned Denise Dillon earlier. You mentioned that game that they played against UConn a couple of weeks ago. Really the only team in the Big East that put any type of fear into the Huskies this season. Took a lead into the locker room, hung with them in the third quarter, then it got away from them late third quarter, turned into kind of a blowout in the fourth. But that still has to give them a lot of confidence. Also, the way they closed out that regular season coming in this week to kind of see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, closing out the regular season, blowing out Marquette and Seton Hall in back-to-back games. That was very impressive, especially on the road, at Walsh Gym. But when you're talking about UConn and Villanova having to match up with them again, Villanova Wildcats leading at halftime, it showed a couple of things. It showed they can scheme, it showed they can compete, it showed that they can control the tempo. But tournaments are about depth. So when you think of this Big East tournament and you think about the depth, obviously Bosco can score. She is a stud. She's an all-star. She'll be first team all Big East. She's going to be playing basketball for a long time, maybe even playing in the Olympics for Canada. She does an amazing job. But does Villanova have, 2 to 3 players that can consistently score in double figures? Do they have players that can score in double figures? Absolutely. But the consistency over the tournament period, that's really the question. They need that secondary playmaking. When teams are loading up on Bosco, when UConn is trying to shut her down, who's going to create that late game offense if Bosco doesn't have the ball in her hands? But I do feel like if Villanova can get balanced scoring, if they can defend without fouling, again, everybody talks about, can you outscore UConn? Well, sometimes you have to defend UConn. We talked about that 03 season, back in the day with Villanova, how they won that game. They won that game by limiting possession. They walk the ball up the court. Now, again, that's not the team they have this year, but there is some chess playing. There's some scheming, but you have to defend one and done. And then if you're able to do that, then, maybe you're capable of beating them for 4 quarters, not just a half. Villanova showed they can play with them for a half, but can they sustain that offense for 4 quarters? Is the supporting cast consistent? Can they rebound on the defensive end? And can they limit the turnovers? And then always something for Villanova. If they knock down threes, they're knocking down threes, they pull out and stretch out that defense, they're in a lot of games if they're able to do that.
Yeah, and the thing about Bosco, I think a lot of people forget she hurt her ankle early in Big East play at DePaul. It looked like a horrific ankle injury. They were worried that it would be long term. She comes back, doesn't even end up missing a game, but it was kind of one of those lingering injuries that bothered her for a few weeks afterwards. And she went into a shooting slump, consequently coming out of it. Wasn't as explosive off the bounce. Teams kind of dared her to shoot the ball. She wasn't making shots consistently. She's not having that problem anymore. I mean, she has gone for 20 or more 13 times this year, Christine. And I think maybe the most impressive stat, she hasn't scored less than 18 since January the 24th. You've watched her play so much over the years. What makes her such a dynamic guard in your mind?
Well, it's the mindset. I mean, she's a player that walks out there and believes she can compete with anybody, and she can. I mean, she has the talent to back it up. She just has a different mindset. You can tell those players that they walk out on the floor and it's just basketball. It doesn't matter who's on the other side. They're just playing the game of basketball. And I remember we were both watching that game. We actually were texting each other when Bosco went down, and it was literally, oh no, just for the game of basketball, because she's so exciting. She has such a high IQ. She really does kind of take the lead for Villanova, not just because she's their best scorer, because she facilitates everything. She's so important because the ball goes through her. And I think when you have someone like Jasmine Bosco who can score, who can facilitate, who can defend, and she's healthy right now, knock on wood, I think if you have someone like that leading your team, you are definitely in good shape, and you always have an option. And she can score in bunches. I mean, she just is one of the best players in the country, one of the best guards in the country.
Our Andy Thompson of the DePaul was at the game. He actually texted me and said, "You have no idea how bad that looked in person, how much pain she's in." I had Denise Dillon in a conversation with her a couple weeks later say, "Yeah, that was a long night. We didn't know because she had never suffered an ankle injury like that before. She was in so much pain, figured it had to be structural, but it was more of a worry thing." And anybody that's ever played basketball before knows that first time you really twist an ankle like that, it feels like life is over as you know it. It's never going to recover. It's such a painful thing, and it's so scary, but she was able to power through it. Speaking of power through some early season struggles, Danae Carter found it down the stretch, particularly that UConn game. I mean, her ability to score it was why they were in that game, and she's that X factor you kind of were alluding to that maybe can help Nova make some noise this weekend and in March Madness.
Well, I mean, she, had a career high 21 points not that long ago, showed off that expanded range of knocking down threes.
Three threes. She only has
Three
6 in her
threes.
career.
Yeah, but then she also had 3 blocks, 3 steals. It was just totally filling up the stat sheet. And then she followed that up with 14 points, in that win over Marquette. So, but I think she really needs to be a factor on the glass. I think she has to be involved offensively, but she's got to avoid fouls because they need her rebounding and they just need her versatility.
You've known Denise Dillon a long time. I won't say how long because you don't like me to talk about dates and years and time frames or anything like that. Just say a long, long, long time. But you've known her well. You followed her entire coaching career. She has done so many great things over the course of it. At Drexel, you mentioned she's the all-time wins leader. She takes over her alma mater, turns Maddie Sechrist into one of the best players in the country after Harry Peretta kind of laid the groundwork and takes them to a Sweet 16. This year, they're 23-6. They won 16 conference games. And remember, they were supposed to be led by Kylie Watson as the second banana to Jasmine Bosco. Watson just hasn't been healthy all year. She's only averaging, what, 9 points or 9 minutes per game in Big East play. She had to regroup on the fly. Is this maybe Denise Dillon's best coaching performance?
Well, it might be, and the reason why, because the landscape of college basketball has changed. When you're not sure who's staying and who's leaving, you never know what you're going to have the next season. And you're recruiting throughout the year, then someone decides they're not coming back, or you're recruiting through the year and someone decides they are coming back. Hooray! Like Jasmine Bosco, I remember the celebration when it was revealed that she was going to stay, and thank goodness for college basketball because she's just such a joy to watch. But I think Denise Dillon, again, I have known her for a long time. We've known each other over 30 years. But I think she is one of the best at making halftime adjustments. I think she does a great job with her staff of getting in that locker room, assessing what's going on, and making those adjustments. And whenever you have a coach that can do that, that can also challenge your team, but support your team, I think she has a really good balance of being positive, but then kind of harsh and saying what needs to be done. But when you see all the players in the huddle locked in on her, that's how you know not only does she have their attention, but she has their respect.
She's such a good communicator. I mean, the opportunity working sideline a few times of eavesdropping in her huddles, just the way she talks, and as you said, locked in, but there's just that open dialogue of, what I say goes, but taking feedback from the players to kind of evaluate what you want to do and how you punch and counterpunch moving forward. And there's a reason why they always seem to get better the deeper they go into a season. A team that might have gotten better, but circumstance kind of played and forced their hand is your former school, the Seton Hall Pirates. You just got to feel bad for Tony Bozzella, don't you? The injuries down the stretch have gotten ridiculous.
Well, when you talk about has Denise Dillon done one of her best coaching jobs ever, you got to say the same thing about Tony Bozzella, because what he's had to deal with and still have this team ready to compete. Yes, they've had some games where things just weren't jiving, but to be 18-11, 12-8 in the conference with all of the injuries that they've had. You think about Savannah Catalan, what she just took that shot to the face, just not too long ago. So, you're dealing with these injuries. You're trying to make a run in the tournament. You want to be deep and have a deep bench, but you don't know who's going to be available. So, when the Pirates played their last game against Villanova, they were down basically 5 guards with Jada being one of the biggest losses for the Pirates, because when she went down, it changed the whole team. I thought she was such a spark on both ends for Seton Hall. Super talented kid, loves to compete, but it's really almost impossible to make up for her absence. And I think the way Seton Hall plays, I think it's oftentimes going to be matchups with whoever they're dealt. And I think if they're knocking down shots and they're rebounding, they're in good shape, and obviously limiting those turnovers. But I think sometimes those matchups just don't serve them well. And that's when we've seen, them not be able to hang in there long enough to compete for the win.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Bozzella was so high on this team coming into the year. Gino Auriemma picked him first in the Big East. Remember, he's not allowed to vote for his own team. So whoever he picks, he has a great track record of whoever he gives his first place vote to comes in second almost every year. They were on track to give Villanova all they could handle, but then the injuries caught up to him. And you're right, Jada Eads, that's where their season kind of turned into a different direction because they were one team with Eads. They've been a completely different team since she's been injured. One other thing on Seton Hall, because if they win their first game, potentially another matchup with Villanova, who they just saw didn't go too well. Hasn't gone too well for whatever reason over the course of Tony Bizzella's career against Villanova. He's 4-16, I think is the number against the motion offense, whether it's been run by Harry Peretta or Denise Dillon. You've been in those coaches' rooms before. When you have a bad matchup like that, when you have kind of a blind spot where you just struggled to defend against a certain system, what do you do come postseason, try to work around that?
Well, and that's exactly it. It's been on the defensive end for Seton Hall when they match up against Villanova, trailing those shooters, closing out in time. And then, I think sometimes sinking a little bit too low, where again, with Villanova, sometimes they'll run that 4 out, 5 out, they'll clear everything out. You have to play honest. And I think that's where it's hurt Seton Hall. And when you're defending well against Villanova, you also have to make shots. And when you can have both things going well at the same time, that's when you have a chance. It's a tough matchup for Seton Hall. They have to have a really good field goal percentage. They have to knock down some threes. They got to get to the rim, get certain players into foul trouble if they want to have a chance against Villanova. And when you talk about Seton Hall, we're kind of assuming they're going to move on. But one sleeper team, maybe St. John's, they're a tough matchup for a lot of teams. They're very athletic. We just saw them in Madison Square Garden, this week. So I think they're a team that if they can get hot, they can be a tough individual matchup for a few teams.
Professional broadcaster Christine Koren-Motta always just laying out the transition so naturally, because the top three teams, they got to wait and find out who they're going to play. But then everybody else, we have set matchups, day one and day two. Let's start with day one. Obviously, the 6-11 game you mentioned, St. John's is a really intriguing team because they're so long. The 8-9 game, you almost feel bad for those two teams. It sounds ridiculous, but wouldn't you rather be the 10 seed than the 8 or 9? Because your reward for winning what's a tough game in that one between Georgetown and Xavier is, hey, you get a turnaround date with UConn less than 24 hours later.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you're trying to stick around for at least one more day. And we talked early, on in the segment about just the excitement of the tournament and who can get hot. If you can make it one more day, it's a great thing. So you just kind of have to take it as it comes. And whatever you're dealt with, you have to walk on that floor no matter what and believe you can match up with any of the teams you're going to play.
Georgetown's got talent, but they have been up and down. They've struggled offensively, not the same defensively as in years past. But the game I think that might be the best in day one is the 7-10 matchup. That is Providence against DePaul. DePaul's record isn't very good, but Christine, they've been a different team here down the stretch.
Oh, they're a drastically improved team, especially in the last 6 weeks. They won 4 of their last 10, 2 of their last 3. I think Pizzotti's team, they were not a mess, but they kind of were having some trouble early on. But they're working, they're improving. The Blue Demons earned their first road win of the season. At Georgetown. Timon finished with double figures. So there's a lot of different things going on towards the end of the season. And again, everything cancels out now. Everyone is 0-0. That's another great thing about the tournament. It does not matter what has happened over the last few months. All that matters is what's going to happen over the next few days. And if you can, play really well, put it together, it does not matter. We've seen it in March Madness, often that there have been teams with losing records that have made the NCAA tournament. Now, does it happen often? No. But if you believe it could be you, then maybe it can be.
Natalia Nelson, also somebody to keep an eye on for DePaul, double figures, 5 of the last 6. And then I just love watching Sabu Gay. The coaching staff at Providence loves her too, had their game. And they wax poetic about how special that kid is. 10, 15 minutes, just how she plays so hard. She does everything well. Scores, rebounds, steals, block shots, nothing that she can't do. Now can the supporting cast help her out? Providence swept the regular season matchups, but again, it's a different DePaul team. All right. We know one matchup that's set quarterfinal day. It's that 4-5 game. That's always one of the more intriguing ones. And this year, it certainly, I think, fits that bill. Creighton is super young, but improved as the season went on. Marquette is super talented, but it's been so up and down, they're kind of hard to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Creighton, they have a class of 6 freshmen, and they've been pretty impressive. I think their ability to believe. Sometimes when you have a young team, you don't know any better. So it's almost, you haven't had the years of experience of getting beat down by a certain team. You just don't know any better. I remember my freshman year when we went to UConn, I started that game, another freshman started that game, and we had the two best games, of our whole team because we literally did not know any better. We're just playing basketball. So sometimes that young mindset is actually a really, really good thing. In Creighton, they won the regular season finale, got them above 500 for the first time since December, when they were 6-5. So, and they also won that tiebreaker to pass St. John's for fifth. So, you might rather be a 6 seed, but it is what it is.
Yeah, you get the bye, but again, if you win the first game, UConn waits in the wings. So, yeah, that's always that toughest one. I think there's no doubt you'd rather be the 10 than the 8 or 9. 5 versus 6, I guess, is a little harder because you're going to have to beat UConn at some point anyway. But yeah, the improvement of Creighton, impressive. Meanwhile, Marquette, Skylar Forbes, incredibly fun to watch. Hallie Weiss is a two-way player. She can score, she can rebound. She almost averages a double-double. It's still hard to figure why Marquette hasn't won more than they have. But at the same time, they did finish tied for third, which is the best the program has done in the last half decade. And they dealt with injuries second half of the year. All right, it's time to put you on the spot, Christine. I think we all anticipate UConn winning the championship, right? So we're going to do predictions a little bit differently. Who do you think gets to the championship game is the first question to face UConn?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Villanova. I think Villanova has shown that they are the next best team. They've gotten some big wins. They have the next big time player in Jasmine Bosco. I just think when you have Bosco leading an offense, you have a chance. And Villanova, again, when they execute, when they knock down threes, they are very hard to beat, and they're playing very well right now. They closed out the regular season on a high note. Again, we talked about those two blowouts back to back. I just think they have the highest ceiling. And if they are able to get to that championship game, I honestly feel like they have the best chance to actually beat UConn. Do I think UConn is going to win the Big East tournament? Yes. Do I think they would win, 9 out of 10 games against Villanova? Yes, I do. But could Villanova get one of those games? Yes. We're beating them for a half. Anybody can play with anybody for a half. I agree with that. However, Villanova has the players. They have the offense. They have the ability to use their high IQ to slow the game down when necessary. But they also get to the rim in different ways, and they can draw fouls. I think the key is if Villanova can get to the free throw line, which means they're drawing fouls, I think that's the key. Early fouls on UConn. If they can get to the rim, or anytime you're playing Villanova, it's like you're a chicken with your head cut off. If you don't jump to the ball, if you don't bump off those cutters, it's hard to stay with Villanova because they're just so smart on their reads against the defense. So I do think it will be Villanova and UConn in the championship. I do think UConn will win the Big East championship, but I think Villanova, if they play the way they're capable of playing, they can have a shot.
One more quick follow-up to that. They lost by 49 in the first game. Obviously, there's not a 49-point difference between those two teams. They were winning at halftime. I don't think that Villanova is necessarily expected to be winning at halftime in another rematch between those two teams. But how do you respond and kind of does it help to see the measure for Villanova of if we play like this is how it's going to go very poorly, and then this is how we got to play to maybe give ourselves a chance? Is that something that helps you going into a potential championship stage?
I think it's talking about some of your own strengths. So, yes, we can shoot the three ball. Yes, we can limit our turnovers. We can get to the rim. We can one and done box out. Again, it's when that ball goes up on the defensive end, it's not ball watching. It's finding someone to box out. And I think a big mistake that a lot of teams make when they're defending UConn is they're working so hard to defend, and then the ball goes up and you almost relax for a minute because the ball goes up, we play defense instead of, finding a player to box out and actually boxing out and going and get the basketball. Well, when you're a team that's supposed to win and maybe, you're getting one and done down on the offensive end, there is a tendency that you can get a little bit tight. So I think the longer you can have that unsettling feeling for UConn as the opponent, the better. But I think Villanova has the tools more so than any other team in the Big East because of their shooting, because of the players they have, because of their high IQ, and because of their ability to limit turnovers at times, and the wisdom, because they've already experienced it, of playing with them for a half. Now you're saying we just need to play another half. We have to put those 40 minutes together. We put 2 quarters together. Now let's try to put all 4 quarters together. And I think it's really a mindset. And even if, you get down a little bit big, it's then, okay, now we're going to cut the game, into 5-minute segments, and we're going to try to win the next 5 minutes. So I think if you can chop the game up in smaller segments and try to win every 5 minutes before the media timeout, I think that's a better mindset than trying to overwhelmingly try to win 40 minutes. Just win 5 minutes at a time.
It's great points, and you're so right about the rebounding thing. Sometimes you see teams take a deep breath once they force the shot, but you got to get that rebound. All right, last thing. Will anybody be within single digits of UConn in the half at any point this week?
I would say only in the championship, potentially, but no.
All right, Christine. So much fun. We appreciate it so much for your time, and we're looking forward to the Big East Championship.
Can't wait. Best time of the year.
That'll do it for this edition of Big East Beat. For Christine Koren-Motta and my usual partners, David White and Brian Webster, I'm Matt Janis. Thanks so much for being with us. We will talk to you next week.